Hey guys, this is Rick. I've gotten a bit of questions as to why I'm supporting this or that various thing in cryptocurrency right now, and I thought I'd give a reasonable answer, as in people I respect are asking me, again, out of respect, why I'm choosing one over the other. And it takes a little bit of backstory. On August 1st of this year, what used to be Bitcoin forked into two new coins. It can be argued a little bit about the semantics about this, but the general story is undisputable that the Bitcoin that existed before August 1st no longer exists. In its stead, we have two different so-called forks or variants of Bitcoin. One of them, or rather, both of these are fighting over Bitcoin's heritage. Both of them are claiming to be the true Bitcoin for various reasons. I'll call these two forks the Blockstream fork, which I call that way because most of the gatekeepers of this particular fork are associated with or employed by the company Blockstream, and the Cash fork because the keepers of this fork generally call that the Bitcoin Cash fork. Whenever you talk to people about this, they will argue that their fork is the better one, and their fork is the only true one, and even the other fork is hostile, and a takeover, and a hijack, and whatnot. But it remains indisputable that on August 1st, Bitcoin as it was ceased to be, and two forks, two different variants, have taken its stead. One calls itself a soft fork, as opposed to the other being a hard fork, using semantics to portray that it's somehow less intrusive, less of a change, less of an impact, less hazard to the network and so on in this change. But technically represents a far more complex and, I would argue, hazardous change to the network in terms of the code it introduces, regardless of what semantics you put on top. The other fork, the Cash fork, has a dramatically simpler change, but is called a hard fork for semantics. And whether you agree or not with these semantics, they are one definition, and it's, again, quite indisputable that the Blockstream fork of Bitcoin is far, far more complex in the problem it tries to solve than the Cash fork of Bitcoin. And the problem both forks attempt to solve is scaling. This is a technical term that means growing, as in Bitcoin was full. The Bitcoin network was at capacity. The Blockstream fork of Bitcoin attempted to solve this by introducing a new type of transaction which is slightly more allowing in how many transactions it allows on the network through an incredibly complex mechanism. And a quarter later, about 8% of transactions are using this mechanism. In other words, frankly, the fork has failed in what it set out to do. In contrast, the Cash fork just increased capacity eightfold, and as such is or has been successful. So, why the confusion? Because the Blockstream fork of Bitcoin maintains the exchange ticker of the Bitcoin that existed before August 1. This causes a lot of confusion, and rightfully so, that people think it's the same network, the same token, when in reality these are two different coins. The coin that existed prior to August 1 forked into two different ones on August 1. But the Blockstream fork of Bitcoin has kept trading as though it was the pre-fork coin, whereas the Bitcoin Cash coin has created a new ticker called BCH instead of BTC. I would argue that it was mainly aggression and community pressure, not to mention gatekeeping of certain parts of the community, that led to the Blockstream fork of Bitcoin claiming the heritage and claiming to be the true Bitcoin in terms of retaining the ticker symbol. As with any open source project, it is not immune to social pressure. However, Bitcoin, as we know it, as we came to know it, is this: where Western Union charges $5 to send $50 for pickup, does it say within 24 hours? No, even just within the US, and for I don't know where, I don't know how long. Bitcoin had an instant transfer for up to 1 cent for pickup anywhere instantly. This is Bitcoin as we came to know it. This is the Bitcoin we used our phones to demonstrate to our friends. Most importantly, this is the Bitcoin that took off using Silk Road, using, well, first alpaca socks, to be frank, but gradually increased in terms of merchants and payments. The subtitle of the Bitcoin white paper is a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. The word payment appears 12 times in the white paper, cash 6 times, versus Blockstream's fork of Bitcoin that tend to emphasize the terms gold and store of value, which appear twice and not at all in the white paper, respectively. So, this is where my position comes from, that the Bitcoin I demonstrated to friends lives on in one of the 2 forks that happened on August 1st, and it is the Bitcoin Cash fork, which I would argue represents Bitcoin. It is the Bitcoin I demonstrated to friends. It is the Bitcoin spirit that lives on in this fork. The Bitcoin that existed prior to August 1, we must remember, does not exist anymore. You have to choose between one of these 2 forks, and you have to choose based on criteria you determine. The ticker symbol, I would argue, is not a valid argument, because that is pure random coincidence. You have to choose which is Bitcoin based on criteria you decide. And I decide the criteria that made me fall in love with Bitcoin when I first saw it, which was this: it was an unparalleled electronic peer-to-peer cash system, which is also in the white paper. Now, there are people who are frustrated as they come into Bitcoin today, and by mistake they are using the Blockstream fork of Bitcoin, BTC. They find out that they have to pay $20 in transaction fees, which is frankly ridiculous. I mean, if we were to demonstrate that in 2011, 2012 to our friends, we would be laughed out of the room. We would be embarrassing ourselves, and we would understand that, so we would be too embarrassed to demonstrate it in the first place, because it wouldn't be cool in the first place to demonstrate. But there is this notion that whenever somebody's doing it wrong, it's the user's fault in the BTC community, and I find that very, very sad to see. There's an elitist almost attitude toward new users that can't handle the high fees, the insecure transactions, the long, if existing at all, transaction times. I saw one user who had gotten their BTC transaction confirmed after almost 3 weeks because they were only paying a single-digit dollars in transaction fee. And whenever you see this happen in the BTC community, the instant response is always, well, they should have known better. They should have paid a high transaction fee. They should have used a SegWit transaction. I'm sorry, but this is not how it works. User Experience Design 101 is that when the user takes a reasonable action and does not get the expected result, then there is a design flaw. It is not the user who is at fault. It is not the user who is at fault. If the user does not get their expected results, the design is wrong. And this is where the Blockstream fork of Bitcoin is today. The design is wrong, which is why we're seeing transaction fees, frankly, which are unpredictable. Just predicting a transaction fee is a horrible experience for a new user. Prohibitive. Not to mention this SegWit transaction nonsense, which isn't even in the default client for that fork. So yeah, Bitcoin lives. Bitcoin is one of the two forks. Bitcoin, as I know it, is one of the two forks that resulted from the August 1 split. It is the fork where you can send any amount anywhere on the globe for up to a cent at most in transaction fees. It is not the Blockstream fork of Bitcoin. That is a dead end. It has failed for all intents and purposes. Its design is flawed at the root, and the community blaming users is doing it wrong. That is why I am calling Bitcoin Cash Bitcoin. That is why I am pointing out every chance I get that the Blockstream fork of Bitcoin is not Bitcoin as we know it. It is a fork of Bitcoin that happened on August 1st. It is not the fork, it is not Bitcoin as was before the fork. It is something else. It is adding way too much complexity to work. Simplicity always beats out complexity. And it has failed in every single ambition it set out to solve.